Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming out to listen, and thanks for those of you who've been sitting here for a week taking some pretty heavy stuff. But I also will talk about some heavy stuff, but I do not want to dwell on the heavy stuff because I think there's a lot we can do to turn this around right now. I'm actually totally an eternal optimist. It may not seem that way when I start my talk, but bear with me because I really think this is a critical moment we can turn things around. So I'm super excited about what I have to share with you today. The title of my talk, Total Load, is about looking at the big picture here. You know, sometimes when you are listening to some of these lectures or talking about some of these topics, whether it's climate change or, you know, chronic disease or whatever it is, we get into the weeds. I mean, just that movie you just watched, Generation Zapped, is you get into the weeds about EMF and it can feel so overwhelming about what do we do and how do we change this. But what I want to talk about is taking the 10,000 foot view, pull back a little bit, look at the big picture and see how we can solve this problem. So let's get this slide moving forward. Here we go. So this is how we may be feeling at this moment right now. Right when we started talking about the oceans dying and deforestation, and we start talking about all the health problems and all the EMS and the chemicals, we feel this sense of profound degradation of our environment, of our lives on this planet. And we really do feel kind of at this tipping point, right? Where we see it happening. It's like a slow-moving train wreck. And we don't exactly know how to deal with this. It is a critical moment in time. Some of you may have read the book, The Sixth Mass Extinction by Elizabeth Kolbert. She talks about how, you know, there have been a series of mass extinctions in the history of planet Earth, and are we in what is called the sixth mass extinction, meaning that we are annihilating species one by one on this planet, eliminating biodiversity. And this is an image that's taken from the New York Times in response to the publication of her book. And it shows in here the red are the species that are endangered, threatened, and then the black is the ones that are theoretically not threatened. But it's broken down into, you know, flowering plants, mollusks, fishes, crustaceans, all the different types of species. We're losing biodiversity on this planet at a breathtaking rate. So the author postulates, are we sitting here watching a mass extinction unfold? And one of the interesting things is that she postulates that yes, we are watching all these species die out, but interestingly, humans are profoundly adaptable. We have this amazing capacity to adapt to our environment, despite all these things that are killing off other species. But what I argue is that we're actually looking at human extinction unfolding right along with the extinction of all these other species. Humans are profoundly adaptable, but are we truly adaptable to what's happening on the planet right now? And this is a graph that shows the biodiversity, the number of species going down, you know, freshwater species, marine species, vertebrate species, and so on. So this is a question that I ask myself all the time. Are we facing human extinction? Are we going to extinct ourselves because of the way we're living on this planet right now? And Steve, in his opening, was spot on in that there has been an environmental movement for quite a long time, since the industrial era has become apparently something that's destroying our planet. And the environmental movement is broad and diverse, and there's an amazing number of environmental advocates and NGOs trying to change things on this planet, trying to save the polar bears, trying to stop deforestation, trying to stop the polar caps from melting, climate change, on and on and on. There's so much great work being done out there to try and save the planet. But why isn't this taking hold the way it should be? Why aren't we all jumping on the bandwagon saying, yeah, we gotta save those rainforests, like today, stop this is nonsense. The ocean is dying. Why are we not all like with our hair on fire about this? And I'm one of those people. Why are we not freaking out about what's happening to our planet? And I think part of the reason is because we don't see the connection between what's happening to the planet and what's happening to us in our daily lives. I mean, truly, what are we doing in our daily lives? We get up, we go to work, we try to feed our family, we try to do the best we can every single day, and it is hard sometimes. It is hard just surviving. I can't worry about the polar bears. I don't have bandwidth for that. That is sort of the experience that we're having. We know it's a problem. We know it's there. It's too overwhelming. But what I think we need to do to change that dynamic, to make it relevant that the polar bears are dying out, that we're killing species on this planet at a breathtaking rate, the way to make that relevant is to make the environment relevant to us. We need to make the case that the environment, this like nebulous thing we always talk about, oh, it's not good for the environment. The environment? No, it's our environment. It's our bathtub that we're swimming in, right? So we need to make the case that the environment matters to us, to you, to each and every one of us. So put this in context a little bit here. You know, we've been in, if you look at the history of humankind, we've been in this age of pestilence and famine. That's the past, right? Where we were really at the mercy of infectious diseases, lack of nutrition. There were all those kinds of things that kept humankind from surviving, and that's where people died from lack of nutrition. People died from infectious diseases. And what's happened in the modern era in just a really short period of time, you know, since humans have been on this planet, is we've moved out of that age of pestilence and famine and into this age of man-made degenerative diseases, chronic illness. So we are now smack dab in the middle of this situation where we're not dying of infectious diseases at the rate that humans used to. We got a handle on that pretty well. But we're dying and suffering from chronic disease. And I think this moment in history where we're all struggling with symptoms, chronic conditions, our kids are sick, and I'll talk a little bit more specifically about what's happening, but I actually think this is such a critical moment for us as human beings on this planet to make a choice. And how many of you are familiar with the film The Matrix, where you're given the option to take the blue pill or the red pill? And the blue pill is you just continue on, ignorance is bliss, just keep going about your life, not really paying attention, all is well, or not so well, but you just continue as you are. And then you take the red pill, and the red pill is like profound awakening to what's really going on. And I think this is not intentional, but it's happening, that the chronic illness epidemic that's sweeping through the modern industrialized world is forcing us to take the red pill. We may not be aware of it, but it's happening. And this is why I'm so optimistic. So the backdrop for this whole scenario is that in the US, we have an unprecedented number of people diagnosed with chronic health conditions. More than half of American adults have a chronic health condition, and many have several chronic health conditions. What's more troubling is we have an epidemic of chronic illness in our children. Now, you probably all just took that sentence in without really thinking about it, but if you put this into historical perspective, children don't get chronic illnesses. Chronic illnesses were something typically that really happened to adults. You know, if you go back to the 1960s, just a few decades ago, you had a very low rate of chronic illnesses among children, less than 10%. And it would be maybe asthma, maybe an occasional type 1 diabetes, maybe some eczema. You know, it wasn't an overwhelming number of children that were living with chronic illnesses. Fast forward to today, and you have 54% of American children with at least one diagnosed chronic illness. That's more than half of American children who have at least one chronic illness. And that's a statistic that reflects diagnosed chronic conditions. That's not even talking about the kids who have all these kinds of symptoms that are maybe a mixed bag of symptoms that don't get a label. So the kid who has severe anxiety and chronic constipation and sinus infections every month and is on antibiotics routinely, that kid's not being picked up by a diagnostic statistic. So if we have 54% of kids with a diagnosis, how many kids are actually not well? How many kids are actually healthy? Now let's take these statistics and compare them to the adult statistics I just gave you. So if the adults today, if half of them have a chronic illness, and you go back and remember that only a fraction of those kids, when they were kids, were sick. Now, what happens when you take 50% of today's kids and you grow them up? How many adults are going to be healthy in 20 years? Not many. So one of the things that is causing us to miss this, to not really see what's going on, is that we tend to see these things through our own lenses, right? So if you have a child, for instance, with an anaphylactic allergy, you might be aware of the fact that there's an allergy epidemic. Or if your child has eczema, you might look into the fact that, boy, eczema is on the rise, or there's an increasing number of children with asthma. Or if your child has an autoimmune condition, you might be paying attention to the fact that there's an autoimmune epidemic. And all of these things are rising concurrently. But this one is the one that is most profoundly disturbing to me, in that we now have 1 in 40 children in the US diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder. And autism is a spectrum, and there are severely impacted kids and adults, although just a few decades ago we really weren't talking about adults with autism very frequently, but now they're aging out. These first crop of kids who were diagnosed with autism are now becoming adults. 1 in 40 kids. That number just a few years ago, when I started this work, a little bit less than a decade ago, was 1 in 150. So the rate of autism, the rate of increase we're seeing every year is truly disturbing, because if you project those numbers forward just a couple of years, we're going to be at 1 in 4 children with an autism spectrum disorder by 2033. And that's actually a conservative estimate. I know Stephanie Seneff is an MIT professor, has projected a much higher rate than that and much sooner. So this is really troubling, especially because autism affects boys more than girls. So if you project these numbers forward, there are not going to be very many boys who don't have an autism spectrum disorder if things stay the way they are, if it's status quo. So all these epidemics, all these discrete epidemics, the obesity epidemic, the asthma epidemic, everything is kind of concurrently rising. What we're not seeing is the common denominator here. This is one epidemic of chronic inflammatory diseases. What's going on here is all of these conditions, whether it's a mood disorder like depression or schizophrenia, whether it's obesity, whether it's ADHD, inflammation is there at the root, at the core. So there's a common denominator here, and we're not looking at the root causes of what's contributing to this chronic illness epidemic. And I think it's important to put this into historical perspective. Because when you're a new parent and you look around and your child has ADHD and your neighbor's child has ADHD and you know so many kids who have autism, it begins to feel normal. And I think there's no better example of that than Allergy. So Allergy is new. There's a book, actually, by this title called Allergy, A Modern Malady, because it's a new thing. We forget this. People tend to think like, well, allergies are just something you have, when you tear up or you get a runny nose in the spring, oh, it's just my allergies, and everybody understands what that means. But had that been 150 years ago and you're like, oh, it's just my allergies, nobody would have known what you were talking about because they didn't exist. There is in the historical record evidence of allergy as early as Hippocrates, so thousands of years ago, that people were allergic to bee stings, and that did happen. But the environmental allergies, the allergies to food, the anaphylaxis, all new. You go back to the middle of the 19th century, that's when you begin to see the first evidence of these environmental allergies that we see as the modern world was coming out of its industrial age, or really coming into its industrial age, I should say. That's when you actually saw people developing environmental allergies, and interestingly, it was among the wealthy, among the people who lived more indoor lives, who ate more processed, refined kind of foods. And you didn't see it among the working classes. The next kind of evolution in the history of allergy is you get anaphylaxis. The term is coined in 1902. It didn't exist before 1902. And the way that it came about is a man named Charles Richet, who was a scientist, who was testing dogs, and he actually made a mixture of meat, injected it with a syringe into dogs, and then fed the dogs the same meat. And the dogs developed anaphylaxis and died. That's interesting. He coined a term. We don't see a lot of anaphylaxis until later. 1930s, you begin seeing something that looks like anaphylaxis that's called serum sickness. That came after sort of a diphtheria shot. 4 million penicillin allergies by the time you get into the middle of the century. 4 million penicillin allergies. That's new. And just as a sort of historical footnote, antibiotics were new in the post-World War II era. We had this round of sulfa drugs that became antibiotics that are now commonplace and ubiquitous in American society. And then you don't really see anaphylaxis till the century progresses on. Now you have 50,000 ER visits for anaphylaxis every single year. 1 in 17 children in this country have a life-threatening food allergy. That means if they eat a peanut or milk, they could die. Imagine talking to your great-great-grandparents about this and trying to explain to them that, oh, don't give my child that milk because she'll die. That's just so crazy. But that's what I wanted to point out here is this is really a historical anomaly. This is a brand new phenomenon. And of course, all of this is happening and rising concurrently with all these neurobehavioral disorders like autism, ADHD, sensory integration, PANS and PANDAS, OCD, NCD, and so on. It's all new. And that, again, is why we don't really think about it, because we're immersed in it. It feels normal to us. You know, if you're in a play group as a new mom with a baby, and your child is on Prilosec because they have reflux, which is really actually oftentimes a food allergy or food sensitivity, and your friend's baby's on Prevacid for the same problem, and your other friend's child is on Prilosec, it feels normal. These are the kinds of things that new parents see every day and feels normal. The Autism Speaks bumper stickers are ubiquitous. They're everywhere. Adderall, Strattera, peanut-free tables at school, Miralax. I cannot tell you how many children in this country get through the day on Miralax. Did you know you're supposed to poop every day? Most people don't know that. Most people think it's like once a week, that's all right. And if your child has a problem, you give them Miralax. Miralax has toxic ingredients on it, and people are giving this to their children every day just to make them poop. That's a profound problem. But it all feels normal because it's everywhere and it's all around us. And this is the one, I always throw this picture up because I see so many babies who are supposed to have beautiful, perfect, fresh skin, and so many babies have eczema. This is an allergy. This is an inflammatory response oftentimes. Something they're eating or something in their environment is making them have this kind of response. The eczema on the cheeks, the rosy cheeks, the red ears, that's an inflammatory response in the body. It's not normal, but it's common, so we think it's normal. This is why I wrote my book. It's called The Compromised Generation, because I wanted to know what the heck is happening to our kids. I don't remember this from when I was a kid. I think I had one friend in elementary school who had asthma. One, and I was like, what is that weird thing you have to do, the inhaler? I mean, there wasn't any of this. Not in the numbers that we see today. So I wrote this book because I wanted to know why. Why are our kids so sick? And here's the problem. There's no smoking gun here. There are far too many things that science has validated to be precipitating this epidemic of chronic illness in our kids. Here's a short list of all the things, many of which I document in my book, that are contributing to this chronic illness epidemic. What is this really about? It's about what has changed in the last 40, 50, 75 years or more that has made our children chronically inflamed, chronically rejecting everything in and around their environment. And it's complex. It really is. When I first got into learning about this, I really dug into the microbiome and learning about the gut and how gut health is so important, because it's of critical importance. And I'll explain a little bit more about that. But we've done so many things to just disrupt our microbiome that alone could have caused this chronic illness epidemic. But it's not as simple as that. If you go through this list, these are all things that medical science has proven are related in some way to these chronic inflammatory diseases. Okay, so we're looking at antibiotics, overuse of antibiotics. We give them to our kids for every single ear infection and sinus infection and sore throat. Even if it's viral, we give them antibiotics, which actually doesn't do anything for the virus other than weaken your immune system. And when you take those antibiotics, it totally destroys your immune system. And the microbiome is the seat of your health. Those microbes that are in and around your body, that's what the microbiome is, especially in your gastrointestinal tract, they keep you healthy. They help you digest your food and extract nutrients. They help you detoxify. They help you produce neurotransmitters to make your brain work properly. So many things. One of the most important things is the microbes in your gut actually help turn your immune system on and turn your immune system off and help regulate your immune system. So if you have an autoimmune disease, it all goes back to your gut. Your gut plays a huge role because those gut bacteria are actually helping to regulate your immune system so it doesn't attack itself. But we could go on and on and on. Glyphosate pesticides, they're toxic. This is like the Roundup. They're ubiquitous. They're sprayed on wheat and oats and corn and soy and canola and on and on and on. It's in breast milk. It's in urine. You can test for it. It's everywhere. It's disrupting our gut bacteria. It's a pesticide. It's ubiquitous. Medical injectables, I just gave the example of what happened where we got anaphylaxis from in 1902. There's an impact there of disrupting the immune system. Proton pump inhibitors, those are the reflux medications. They change the pH of your gut. If we think about your gut as a pond, like there's an ecology in your gut, and you throw something like an antibiotic into your gut or a proton pump inhibitor, it changes the pH and changes what can live there. So if you took that pond, the analogy of the pond, and you dumped a whole lot of Clorox bleach into that pond, what's that gonna do to the pond? It's gonna kill the stuff that normally lives there, and other kinds of yucky stuff is gonna grow instead. And that's what happens when we take proton pump inhibitors, so shutting off the acid in our stomach, like Prilosec and Prevacid. That's what happens when we take birth control pills or hormone and steroid medications. 80% of women in the United States have taken birth control pills at some point, and that medication disrupts your gut bacteria. It changes the pH. Asthma medications change the pH in your gut. This is all really important. I mean, I literally could stand here for hours talking about, I haven't even gotten to the good stuff, like the coal power plants that emit mercury into the air, and that gets into our water and into our fish. I haven't gotten to diet, the standard American diet, high sugar, high carbohydrate content of the standard American diet, common hospital birthing practices. I mean, literally, I could go on for hours about all of these things and how they contribute to the modern illness epidemic. I mean, this is why this is like a big fat ball of yarn. How do we untangle ourselves from this? And what are we really saying here about the chronic illness epidemic we're seeing amongst our kids? Our kids are sick because we live in this mess. The modern industrial world does not support human health. And the thing that I find so interesting is that the families who have a child diagnosed with autism, many of them wake up to this reality and this awareness sooner than other families because they're in it. It is hard raising a child with an autism spectrum disorder. And you start learning about the things in and around that child's environment that actually impact them. And so you start waking up to this reality, and you're highly motivated to kind of change your environment and change the things you're doing because you can see that if you make those changes, it impacts your child. But we have so many people who are kind of mildly affected, like they have the soft signs. So that's what this cartoon is kind of depicting, is that, you know, the families who are really in it, who are just deep in it, are kind of in the foot of the boat here, just bailing out as fast as they can. And then there's the people up, maybe have little environmental allergies, maybe they have a little reflux, maybe they have a little skin condition, but like life goes on. And they're looking at the families with autism, and they're like, I wonder what causes autism. I wonder why all those families have autism. Not realizing that they're actually in the very same boat, exposed to the very same things. One of my colleagues wrote a book called Almost Autism, because she had a child who had sensory processing disorder and some ADHD-like symptoms and some eczema and constipation and other things that are very common in autism, but her child didn't have autism. But the word almost, the title Almost Autism, I think just says it perfectly, because every single one of us who has a child in the United States of America in 2018 has a child who almost has autism, meaning autism is like the worst manifestation of what happens when you live in the modern industrial world. And we're all kind of experiencing some level of that exposure and what it does to our health. And the reason why I know this, or the reason why I believe this, is because of this theory, the theory known as total load. In that what creates an illness like autism or an autoimmune disease or whatever kind of health condition you have, it's not about your genes, it's not about your family history, it's about your total load, the total load on your body. And where this term comes from is from engineering. If you think about building a bridge, and I'll read you this quote that was, this comes from one of my mentors, Patricia Lemmer, who's written a couple books. She's been in the field of autism for 40 years. And this is what she says when she's describing total load. When a bridge collapses, who or what is to blame? Improperly placed machinery, the engineer who conceived the design, the weight of the cars traveling over the bridge every day, the weather? The total load theory postulates that it is the cumulative effect of all these factors that brought down the bridge. So what we're saying here is that, well, you can look for a smoking gun, like the one thing that gave your child Crohn's disease. Is it the microbiome and they don't have the right mix of bacteria in there? The one thing that gave your child autism, was it a mercury overload? The answer is it's all of these things, and it's different for every child. It's just that there is an overload. The total load of stressors on the body is too much, and there's not enough resilience in that body to withstand that total load, so the bridges collapse. So there's a corollary to the total load theory that I want to talk about, which is that, first of all, you understand all of these things I just listed, the antibiotics and the glyphosate and the standard American diet and all of those things on that list. Those are inputs that go into the barrel. They're like drops of water that go into the barrel, and the barrel is your body. And at some point, you have a limit. You can't take any more drops of water in that barrel. So all those stressors are going into that barrel. The corollary to the total load theory is that your barrel may be different size from the barrel of somebody next to you. And your child's barrel is different than your barrel. So what determines the size and strength of your barrel is what kinds of health supporting activities do you do. So as an example, again, here's all the kinds of things going into the barrel. Just a reminder, lots of stressors. And by the way, when I say stressors, I'm not just talking about toxins or antibiotics or pesticides or whatever it is. It's emotional stressors. It's EMFs. It's anything that triggers a stress response in the body. And that's why this is a total load theory. Emotional stress counts. That's a drop that goes in the bucket. In the medical world, this is known as allostatic load. But there are many things that actually can increase the strength and size of your bucket, can build your resilience to be able to handle all of these stressors. Okay, so things like natural rhythms, biorhythms. If you get up first thing in the morning and you put your bare naked eyes out to the sun, that sets a circadian rhythm. And when you go to bed and turn down the lights as the sun goes down, that's a natural rhythm that actually supports your health and gives you more resilience. Exposure to natural light, same concept. Clean air and water and nutrition, stress management, meditation, mindfulness practices, things like touching the earth actually builds resilience, believe it or not. There's science behind that. Spirituality, actually believing in something and a higher purpose, actually builds your health and resilience. There's science behind that. Having meaningful, supportive, nurturing relationships builds your resilience, increases the size and strength of your barrel. So this really boils down to a pretty simple concept, which is that why are people so sick? We have too much of the bad stuff and not enough of the good stuff. Too many things going into our bucket, and our barrels are not big enough to withstand it. Now think about how this applies to our kids. Our kids have these itty-bitty little baby buckets. And these little bitty baby buckets can't tolerate all the things we're throwing at it. You hear these things thrown around. I'm sure you've heard it a million times, the 287 chemicals found and toxicants found in umbilical cord blood. The kids are being born into this world already totally buckling under the total load. And we're not doing enough to build their resilience for them to be able to tolerate this total load. And the worst part is these stressors on their bodies, it's different for kids because their brains are growing, because they're developing, because they're learning things like speech and language, and their vision is developing. I mean, these are profound things that happen. I mean, just think about the miracle of human beings and how babies go from these little mush balls into all of you. It's amazing. But that's an incredibly complex time where things need to happen a certain way. And if you interrupt that with chronic inflammation and a baby has to deal with a toxic overload or EMFs or something that triggers a massive inflammatory response in them, it's going to interfere with their development. So as an example, cross-crawling. Babies need to crawl. And how many of you today know a child that just never crawled? Oh, he went right to walking. He's a genius. Okay, that's not necessarily a genius, that's an adaptation. The child went to walking when they should have gone to crawling first, because when you crawl, it actually connects the hemispheres of your brain. So what's happening is our kids are being assaulted with all these stressors when they're supposed to be crawling, and they're so busy dealing with all of these stressors, they miss these key milestones. And that has lasting and profound impact on their learning and their ability to just deal in the world. So there's another element to all of this, which is that all these things going into the bucket, these stressors, there's so many, it's overwhelming, and they're synergistic and having a greater impact because they're going in at the same time. So as an example, a really common example of toxins that are synergistic, meaning they become more toxic when put together than when separate, would be aluminum and fluoride. Aluminum and fluoride are both neurotoxins separately. When you put them together, they are more powerfully neurotoxic. They're more potent as a combination synergistically. And there's research on all of these things. If anybody wants these slides later, I've got the research behind it. Titanium dioxide and cadmium, combinations of persistent organic pollutants like PCBs and dioxins. When you combine these things, they're much more toxic to the body. So that's scary, because we've done enough research to know that this is happening. But what we haven't done is the research to know what all the 85,000 plus chemicals that are out there on the market are doing together synergistically. We just don't know. We've studied a bunch of them, but there's so many out there that as individual toxins have never been studied, and then they certainly have never been studied in combination. So what are their synergistic effects? And then the ultimate synergy here is that we are exposed to all these stressors as we are basically depleting our ability to deal with those things. So, I mentioned the barrel, the size of the strength of the barrel. Well, these are the ways that we commonly reduce our resilience and our capacity to handle these stressors, and this is in everybody's life in modern America. Microbiome annihilation. How many of you in here have never taken an antibiotic? Not one person just raised their hand, for those of you not in the room. That's unbelievable. Because when you take one round of antibiotic, it forever changes your microbiome and the composition of it. It will never be back at what it was. That is what is happening to our immune systems. Is we do this, we don't know the consequence. When you annihilate your microbiome, what happens is you are not able to detoxify as effectively. So as an example, if you ingested mercury and you've never taken an antibiotic, those little microbes in your gut actually help you demethylate the mercury, excrete it from your body, and make it less toxic to you. But if you take a couple rounds of antibiotics, and then you eat mercury, do you know what you do? You store that mercury in your fatty tissues. It stays in your body. So this is what I mean about the synergistic effect of some of the things that are happening in the modern world that we're not even aware of. Nutritional deficiencies are another one. So there's so many foods that help us detoxify and help us get rid of all of these assaults in our environment. Sulfur-containing foods like eggs and cabbage and ginger and garlic, they actually provide the nutrients we need to help our liver detoxify. But how many of your kids are eating ginger and garlic and cabbage and all these wonderful foods that used to be normal, but are not anymore? They're not in the standard American kid diet, which we have a kid diet, a kid menu. White foods on a menu that's different from the adult food, which is a totally separate story. I digress. Sleep deprivation. I came from the school where you sleep when you're dead. That's kind of like what we do in America, right? Like, go, 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 come on. We're aggressive, we're competitive, we achieve, we only have one life here, and we're going to do it. And the problem is when you don't sleep, you don't detoxify, you don't heal and repair. So what's so fascinating is they just found that we have a lymphatic system in our brain. This is like brand new. Just a couple years we've known this, just coming out. Meaning, the lymphatic system is what helps you drain toxins out of your body and infections and deal with all the kind of cellular waste. Well, we didn't know before that there's a lymphatic system in your brain, which helps you remove cellular waste from the brain and from toxins from the brain. Well, you know when that lymphatic system is activated? When you sleep. So when you're sleeping in a deep, restful sleep, your lymphatic system opens up and washes out the toxins. If you don't sleep, it stays shut, and you're not washing out the toxins. So sleep is of critical importance. And sleep is also when your body heals and repairs. It's when you're in a parasympathetic state in your nervous system. Sympathetic state is when you're in fight or flight, right? And that's what the stress of everyday life is. You're running for the train, you're trying to catch a train, you're stressed out, you're in a sympathetic state. If you're emotionally charged about something, you're in a sympathetic state. And you're not going to heal or repair when you're in a sympathetic state. When you're sleeping, meditating, relaxing, you're in a sympathetic state. So one of the interesting things, the last bullet point here, the lack of exposure to nature, that's actually really important and scientifically documented now to be important to your health, because when you're in nature, it upregulates your parasympathetic nervous system. So you can actually detoxify and heal by walking in the woods. That is science. It's called nature. It's called forest bathing. And there's all kinds of literature showing that it reduces cortisol levels and slips you into a parasympathetic nervous state. It helps you heal and recover and be resilient. A couple other things that are, again, part of our daily life, EMFs. Same thing. All this stuff you guys have been learning about EMFs, same thing. When you're exposed to EMFs, electromagnetic radiation, you are in your nervous system is in a sympathetic state. So if you're sleeping next to a Wi-Fi router or near it or in your home, you're not really going to slip into that parasympathetic nervous state because your system is roused. It's like stimulating the immune system when you're sleeping. So again, you're not going to repair, you're not going to heal. And that's everywhere. EMFs are ubiquitous. And the last thing I want to mention is sunlight deprivation. It's not just about vitamin D, folks, although that's hugely important because vitamin D is produced when your skin sees the sun, sees the direct sunlight. We slather on our sunscreen. We're afraid of the sun. So of course we need to produce vitamin D, but we also need sunlight for detoxification, for energy production, for the mitochondria in our cells. And modern life does not allow us to see the sun. So, okay, I'm so glad that part is over because that is the doom and gloom. That's like the worst stuff, right? That's just all I have to tell you right now, and it's succinct of a way about how bad it is right now. It's really modern living, and living in the industrialized world is really taking its toll. It's making us sick, and it's making it so that our kids cannot survive, let alone thrive. So what are we going to do about this problem? How are we going to solve this? It's overwhelming, isn't it? Doesn't it just feel massively overwhelming? So who's going to fix this? Is it science? I mean, the reason I know any of this stuff, the reason I can talk to you about some of this stuff is because I've read a lot of the scientific literature out there. So science has done an awesome job helping us understand about all these things that are new to our lives and how they're impacting our health and how they're impacting the planet. So science is awesome. So I totally believe in science and that it holds the key to how we're going to get out of this. But I'll tell you this, we can't do science like we've been doing science and get out of this problem. We have to think differently and use science differently. So the reason why it's important for us to continue to do this work, to study all these molecules, whether it's perchlorate or fluoride or aluminum or lead, we need to keep studying these things so that we know that they are bad for us or good for us, depending on what we're studying. Because then we can enact policy to take these things out of our environment. So here's a great example. In the 1970s, there's a pediatrician by the name of Dr. Phil Landrigan, worked through the Mount Sinai Children's Environmental Health Center, eventually became sort of very well known for children's environmental health advocacy. But in the 70s, he and some colleagues were advocating for getting rid of lead in consumer products, so gasoline, paint. So the two biggest kind of exposures for lead, right? And so because Dr. Landrigan took the science that we had about lead, that lead is a toxin, it reduces IQ in children, it can impact development. We knew that science, and he applied it through public policy and got lead out of paint and out of gasoline. And as you can see in this chart here, when you took the lead out, the blood levels that you can measure of lead in the blood, those also decreased. So it's hugely important that we do this kind of science and keep doing it. The problem is, if we keep doing one molecule at a time, we're never going to get where we need to be to understand how to get out of this modern chronic illness epidemic. Because we picked the big ones, right? Like, okay, we know fluoride, mercury, PCBs, BPA or bisphenol A. We know those are baddies. So maybe we can each, handle that. Like the news covers it. Okay, bisphenol A is so bad, and you got to buy a product without bisphenol A. Okay, that's good. But then next week it's going to be something else. So how do we keep up with this massive load, with the 85,000 chemicals that are on the market? Do we have to study and know and demonstrate each one is toxic to the body and then get rid of it out of our lives? Is that how we're going to go? That's going to take a really, 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 really long time. But then we don't even know what we don't know. So how many of you have seen this study or know the Environmental Working Group? Environmental Working Group is one of my favorite organizations. Visit their website, ewg.org. They do all kinds of studies and research and provide information to consumers to help them make good choices about products and what's out there. And they just released this database where they took samples of tap water from millions of geographies in the US, millions of different municipalities, and tested the water. Okay? This is, if you think about what happened in Flint, Michigan, where they had lead in the water and the kids' blood lead levels were going up, this is a really important public health mission that they've taken on here. So I decided to look up Melville, New York, where we are here today, and see what's in the water. And just in this water, there are 3 chemicals that are above health guidelines. And let me just tell you, health guidelines are really lax, meaning this should be 0. But they have allowable limits for these things in the water. So you have 1,2,3-trichloropropane, which causes cancer, hexavalent chromium, which is the Erin Brockovich chemical. Do you guys remember the Erin Brockovich story in Woburn, Massachusetts, where all those people died of cancer and were getting sick from cancer? That chemical's in the water here, just saying. And perfluorinated chemicals, which harm the immune system and cause changes in mammary glands. That's man boobs. Like boys who are developing the way they shouldn't be developing. Those were what were found above health guidelines, and plus they found all these other contaminants that were detectable within range of health guidelines. But again, health guidelines are. So what do you do with this? Don't drink the water. Like, we don't even know what we don't know. We're going through life and we're exposed to all these things and we have no idea. It's like lambs to the slaughter. We just don't even know. So I am telling you, we got to keep studying these chemicals one at a time. Yes, we got to keep proving that they're dangerous, but we got to do more than that because this keeps happening. You guys remember BPA, and it's like all over the news, like bisphenol A is bad, it's an endocrine disruptor, it's in baby bottles, get it out. And then all of a sudden, every single plastic bottle, water bottles, baby bottles, started having these labels that said BPA free, and we're like, whew, now I can buy this stuff, it's okay. No problem, crisis averted. Until you find out that they're replacing the BPA with BPS, which is another plasticizer, probably more dangerous than the BPA itself. But the products can say, we don't have any BPA, it's safe. No, it's not, because it's one chemical out and another chemical in. This is what the treadmill looks like. And then if you think about the pace of human innovation, this is a registry that keeps track of all new molecules that are out there in the world, maybe not on the market yet, but have been discovered. And this says of the 100 million substances in this registry, approximately 75 million were added over the last 10 years. On average, the CAS has registered one substance every 2.5 minutes over the past 50 years. We're just going to keep studying it. Don't worry, we'll figure it out. Let's go. We're on the treadmill. We're running, trying to figure out whether these are going to cause problems for our health. We can't keep up with this. And this is what we look like when we try. It's just chasing our tail. We just keep innovating. And I'll tell you, the other thing that's really interesting about being in a capitalist society is everything's mine. So when I discover these new chemicals, I patent them. Now, what is interesting about patenting is you can only patent something if it's new. Like you can't patent oregano unless you change it molecularly. That's interesting to think about. Does your body know what to do with these new chemicals? What does your body think when you put something that's patentable into it? It knows what to do with oregano or thyme or rosemary. It doesn't know what to do with, chlorinated, fluoridated, blah, 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 whatever the different chemical compound is, right? I just want to keep us up for a while. So we need to shift how we're thinking about all these toxins in and around our life. Not just because it's overwhelming and it's giving us all angina, it's because it is not helpful to solving the problem on its own. So we have this mentality that we look at one molecule at a time and we want to see what that molecule does in the body and in the environment. We got to keep doing that. I'm not saying stop that. But we have to start thinking about in terms of total load and the many complex and synergistic factors that impact the whole human body, the whole system, and the whole planet. So I want to talk for a minute about autism and what autism teaches us about total load. So these are two of my favorite books written by two of my mentors. The left is Dr. Martha Herbert, who's a pediatric neurologist at Harvard Medical School and Mass General Hospital. She was in the Generation Zapped film you just saw. I work with her very closely on a project I'll tell you about. And then Outsmarting Autism, written by Patricia Lemmer, who again was this woman who coined the term total load when talking about health. And what they talk about in their books is how autism is not genetic, it's not brain-based, it's not something you're born with and you just have the rest of your life. They talk about how autism develops over time, maybe starting preconceptually, with another layer being added on in utero, with another layer being added on in the first 3 months of life, and another layer of total load added. So it's something that develops over time. And for kids with autism, it's like the bridge breaking, right? The total load is so great and they don't have the resources to be able to deal with the total load. So they develop symptoms that look like autism. But what's interesting about autism and total load is that some kids actually make full recoveries. Now, this is not what you hear. If you have a child and you bring them into the pediatrician and they're developed with pervasive developmental delay or autism spectrum disorder, that's not what you hear. You don't hear that autism is reversible. In fact, usually what you hear is this is genetic, it's lifelong, I'm very sorry. We like to tell parents to start preparing financially. Your child may never be able to take care of themselves. And actually, despite what we say about neurodiversity and autism, and autism does give us these profound, interesting, and unique neurodiverse aspects to the human brain. But many of these kids are so sick, and we don't recognize it as a medical condition. They have microbiome imbalances, they have inflammation in the gut, inflammation in the brain. This is all stuff that we can measure and see that many of these kids are medically sick. But what's happening is, some parents are waking up to this idea of total load, and they're doing everything they can to reduce their child's total load and build their supports. And some of these kids are getting all the way better. Some kids are improving marginally. Some kids are getting all the way better so they don't have autism anymore. This is actually a real discharge paper from a child who had autism and was discharged as no longer having autism. If you can't read it, it says, previously diagnosed with autism, underwent years of intensive ABA, occupational therapy, speech therapy, and medical, meaning addressing the root causes like the inflammation, and nutritional therapies. He no longer has autism. His developmental delays have resolved. He no longer requires or receives therapy. This is a real kid that I know and I met. And I know lots of families that have similar stories. It's not always a quick journey. It's not an easy journey, but it happens. And you start hearing these stories, and I've been collecting stories for about a decade of families that have reversed every kind of condition in their kids. Crohn's disease, rheumatoid arthritis, eczema, allergies, ADHD, and autism. And you start seeing a pattern emerge. And what that pattern looks like is that these families did everything they can to increase the supports, so that's increase the size and strength of the barrel, and decrease the stressors. And then especially with kids who have behavioral neurodevelopmental disorders, meaning that their brains were impacted in critical developmental moments, oftentimes there are bio-individual therapies that are needed. So remember how I was talking about the child who didn't cross-crawl? There are actually therapies out there that help rewire your brain so that you actually kind of revisit that developmental milestone. So many of these families employ that kind of therapeutic approach to have a child who gets better. And this isn't just with autism, but the autism community has taught this to us because these are the parents who are the most motivated. They are in it. It is hard. And they want to help their child who is suffering, oftentimes with physical pain. So they take action and they do these things. But this happens in autoimmune diseases, it happens in asthma, it happens in allergies, it happens in mood disorders like bipolar disorder, depression, anxiety. And these are real kids that this happened to. Recovered from asthma, ADHD, chronic pain, depression, arthritis, and autism. These are real stories of real kids who got better because lifestyle changes were made, environmental changes were made, because the families looked at this from the perspective of total load. So what worked for these kids who got better? What are some of the really specific things that these families did? Because again, you can see patterns and you can see what these families have done to help their kids. So what do? They embrace things that are natural and avoid the things that are new to nature. So all that hand-wringing we're doing about EMFs, it's like taking this thing and saying, EMF, like that's not really natural. You don't need to know the science. Although, again, we need to have the science there to make policy changes. But as a parent, you gotta just use this lens. Is this something natural that the human body has evolved with for millennia? Or is it something that's new and the body's not gonna know what to do with it? Or it might be stressing the body. These families use nutrient-dense food. And I'll say something about diet because diet is contentious and there's a lot of opinions about diet. It's cultural. It's what our mama fed us, so people get really emotional about food. It needs to be nutrient dense and it needs to be bio-individual. And the reason I say that is because what works for one child does not work for another. And one of those reasons is because, again, as individuals, we have developed different kinds of reactions to foods and relationships with foods. So a lot of it has to do with food sensitivities. Then when you disrupt your microbiome, you oftentimes develop food sensitivities, inflammatory allergic responses to foods that you eat. And what I might be sensitive to is going to be totally different from what you're sensitive to. So one child's going to need different foods than another. There's no universal diet. But they all need nutrient-dense food, and they need food that supports the cells and supports the brain. Microbiome diversity, hugely important. If you guys don't know of Jeff Leach and the American Gut Project, or the Human Food Project, I highly encourage you to check him out, Leach. This guy is an anthropologist whose daughter had type 1 diabetes, and he had read some medical literature that kids with type 1 diabetes have an altered microbiome. They have gut dysbiosis. It's not the right balance of bacteria in their gut. So he's like, I gotta check this out and see what this is all about. So he started, basically, he's like a citizen scientist who went out into the world and started sampling everybody's poop and asking them what they're eating. And he then went to the only, really truly indigenous culture that he could find where he thought he could get a pure poop sample from people who've been living the same way as their ancestors and living the same way that their ancestors did thousands of years ago. So he went to Africa to live with the Hadza, which are a group of people that live very similarly to the way that their ancestors did thousands of years ago. And he sampled their poop, and he watched what they ate. So what I would encourage you to do is check out his research, because what he's finding is that you can alter what's in your gut substantially and profoundly by what you put in your mouth. So it's of critical importance that we have good diversity in our gut. And these families know that and started putting things into their gut that would build diversity. And you know how you do that? You put in a lot of different species of plants, because the microbes in your gut thrive on high fibrous foods and plants. So when I was talking about Jeff Leach, he advocates that you eat 35 species of plants every week. And you know what I like to do? I like to tell my kids that. Be like, can you do 35 this week? Let's do it. Come on, it's a challenge. We love that kind of stuff, right? 35 species of plants a week to build your microbial diversity. That's the kind of stuff these families do. Sleep and natural rhythms. You get up with the sun. You turn the lights down at night. A lot of people put red lights into their homes at night, or orange lights, because the blue lights, as you have all heard through this conference, disrupt your sleep. It can suppress your melatonin. So when you're looking at a computer screen or a television or an iPhone or whatever it is, in the evening, you're not going to get the good quality sleep that you need. And again, I don't need to beat the dead horse, but how important is sleep for detoxification? Incredibly important. These families put a priority on sleep. We don't do that culturally, but we need to start thinking that way. I've already been over the outdoor exposure, the importance of that, natural environments, movements, and exercise. I'm a big proponent of natural movement. So there's actually an organization called NatMove. I think it's natmove.org or natmove.com. And they advocate moving the way our ancestors did, climbing trees and jumping over boulders and moving in natural ways instead of just like running on the treadmill, you know? And that is another practice that's really supportive. Let kids go outside and play and climb trees. That's an example. And nurturing relationships, that's getting to sort of that kind of emotional piece, like trying to reduce the emotional stress in a home. And what did these families do to eliminate the stressors? Again, the categories of all the things I've talked about. They avoid the new to nature. They avoid the pharmaceuticals, the processed foods, the sugars, the artificial lights, the EMFs. You know, they get rid of the smart meters and take Wi-Fi out of their house. These families are all hardwired, just so you know. Almost all of these families who get better and stay better, a lot of them hardwire their homes. Because what these families are showing us is that human health is directly correlated with the condition of their surroundings. Okay, so this is what I mean about the total load theory being really important not only to our health, but to planetary health. Because what's also happened with these families that have gotten their kids better, they don't pollute the earth the way everybody else does, because they're mindful that I don't want that toxic chemical in my home. They're not buying it, it's not being manufactured. So if we take care of our own health, if we pay attention to the fact that like our surroundings need to be health supporting, think about what that does for the planet. And think about how that may change the environment, which we think is out there. It's not the environment, it's our environment. Here's a perfect example. Human beings recognize and understand that animals need to be in their natural habitat. We get that, right? So we see a picture like this and we're like, oh, it's so awesome. Nature is so breathtaking. Look at that elephant and the baby in this natural environment. That's the way it should be. And we see something like this and this makes us so sad, because the elephant is not in its natural habitat. That's a heartbreaking picture. But we get it. We see the difference. We know that's good. This is bad. Like, we get that, right? What we don't get is that this is us. We are not living in our natural habitat. We are so fish out of water, it's not even funny. For millennia, human beings lived in a natural habitat that was not what we live in today. It was like this. This is how human beings lived for so long. And then all of a sudden, we decided to live like this. Is it any wonder we look like that sad, dumpy elephant? Like, what are we doing? Why do we see this is so clear and so logical for animals, but we don't see it for ourselves? And the problem is it's making the connections. It's just what Steve said in the beginning, is not seeing the connections between things. And this is a perfect example of us not seeing the connection. We see this. These are the EpiPen walls. How many of you have been in your children's school nurse's office and seen this? This is every kid in the school that has an anaphylactic, life-threatening food allergy, and their EpiPen's hanging on the wall, and the nurse knows it. We don't see the connection between this and this. Because my toddler playing on the computer does not result in anaphylactic allergies, because it's not a one-to-one. So that's why we're not getting it. But as I've talked about, this child is in sympathetic nervous state right now, right? Getting blue light, maybe this is at night, getting EMF exposure, and that's compounding with all the other things that are impacting this child. So we don't see the fact that she develops this later as related. We don't get it. But this is what's happening to our kids. Okay, this poor donkey's probably got what, I don't know how to guess these things, like 700 pounds of straw on its back. That poor thing. You know, that donkey's about to collapse. And when that donkey collapses under the total load, under the weight of what he's carrying, our scientists will rush over and be like, I think it's this straw. This one did it right here. Or it's these 3 straws. It's the BPA, the mercury, and the lead. That did it. It is not. But it is. It is. It isn't. It's all of those things. It's the total load. The other thing that we do that's really funny is when this donkey collapses, we take a DNA sample. And we're like, that donkey had the worst genes. It's in the genes. This donkey's dad also collapsed. It's in the genes. You know, like, that's so dumb. We're really missing the boat here, right? So we need to start thinking of things in the context of the big picture of the total load. And our kids who are so sick are trying so hard to tell us, they're like, wake up, Mom! I'm sick here, I need your help! But we're not hearing them. The kids truly are the most profound biomarker of health of the planet, and we're not seeing it. Right? Isn't that a basic concept? The most vulnerable of us are the ones who are going to tell us that something's wrong. It's the canary in the coal mine, right? The story of the canary in the coal mine is miners used to bring canaries down because they're loud chirpers and they sing a lot. You bring them down into the mines and they stop singing. Uh-oh, better get out of there. This is what our kids are trying to tell us. The analogy of the canary in the coal mine is just too much for me to handle. If you think about kids on the autism spectrum, they've stopped singing. Do we hear them? Are we listening? So this is the part where I get really excited because I think we can do something about this. I know we can do something about this. What if we studied, instead of looking at BPA and what it does to the endocrine system and lead and what it does to the brain cells, what if we studied total load? And what if we looked at the impact of removing all of those stressors? Would this little bucket right itself? We don't actually know the answer to this because science hasn't done this yet. Doesn't that kind of blow your mind? Like, science hasn't done this yet. And this is the age of quantifiable self. I mean, how many of you have heard the term biohacker? Biohacker is a term, there's like a little cluster of people who are out there like with their Apple watches on, like measuring their blood pressure and they're checking their blood glucose and they're, you know, really into mitochondria and they're trying to figure out how to like maximize their health. Those are usually adults who are like fitness gurus, but they're biohackers. They're like, you can measure yourself. I can take a pee sample and a poop sample and I can test how healthy I am. Like, there are so many tests out there right now. It is the age of quantifiable self. We can measure ourselves upside down, left and right. And in this age, we're not measuring total load? That just feels like a no-brainer. So the question is, what happens if you take a child and you reduce their total load, increase their supports, and decrease their stressors? What happens? And do you remember the story, the discharge paper I showed you earlier? That's this kid. He had autism. No, he doesn't. He's like the coolest kid on the soccer team. No autism. But you know what? His mom reduced the total load, fed him nutritious food, got rid of EMF, got rid of the environmental stressors. So I would like to introduce you to a project where we are doing this science. As I mentioned before, at the beginning, I think Steve mentioned, I run a nonprofit organization called Epidemic Answers. I don't think we're ready to switch to that yet. We're still on there. Which is a 501c3 nonprofit organization, which is basically dedicated to helping raise awareness to this issue of our children's health, but also help parents find healing solutions because they're out there. So we have initiated a project called the Documenting Hope Project. We've been working on it for several years. It is a multi-year project, and it is just about to take off. What the Documenting Hope Project is a series of scientific studies. The first one is called CHIRP. It stands for Child Health Inventory for Resilience and Prevention, where we will be measuring total load in children. I'll explain more in a second. The second part of the study is an actual clinical program. We are taking a small sample of children through a pilot healing program, and we're trying to replicate what these families have done anecdotally to reverse their children's autism and autoimmune diseases and ADHD. So first, to tell you about CHIRP, it's basically an online survey. We're going to begin recruiting for this survey in a couple of weeks. We just got IRB approval, which means this is validated research, scientific, what you need to publish for peer review. And we are basically asking parents tons of questions. All that stuff I asked, I mentioned about what's contributing to the chronic illness epidemic, all the knowledge that's out there, what we know might be contributing, we're going to collect data on that. So we ask questions like, during this child's lifetime, what is the cumulative number of weeks that the child was on antibiotics? What's the longest consecutive period of time this child's been taking antibiotics? Has the child ever taken oral antibiotics, IV antibiotics? Like anything that you think might be contributing to chronic illness, we ask it. And if you are concerned that we're not covering it, come ask me, because I bet you we covered it. In any case, we're going to be recruiting for this, and we are looking for parents of children ages 1 to 15 to fill out our online survey. I'm telling you, it's a commitment. It takes a couple hours, but this is the cool part. If you do it, you get a report back. You get a personalized report that basically spits out all your answers and organized by category, but it highlights the things that are stressors. So you remember when I said, you don't know what you don't know? This is a report that's actually going to tell you the things that are in your daily life that might be impacting your child's health. It'll be highlighted in orange. So if you're interested in participating in this study as a parent or you know somebody that is, please go to documentinghope.com, sign up for our emails. There's an email sign-up feature on the website, and you'll receive notification when this enrollment begins. Again, we're beta testing the system right now. We'll be ready to enroll in a couple of weeks. You'll be seeing this on Facebook, so please do make sure to follow us on Facebook, on Twitter, because we'll be enrolling soon. The second part of the Documenting Hope project is really exciting, because what we're doing is we're giving basically an opportunity, almost like a scholarship program, to families who want to participate in a rigorous program to heal their child. We'll be giving them opportunity to participate in a clinical program where we will be paying for their organic food. We will be paying for the removal of EMFs from their home. We will be paying for whatever supplements they need, providing the family with everything they need to create a perfect healing environment for their child. And we're going to be tracking their improvement over time by taking things that you can measure minimally invasively in blood, urine, and stool, hair, and making all these kinds of changes. How many of you have heard of a bowel biologist? Is a well-known kind of environmental consultant who can come into your home and tell you where all the health dangers are. We're going to be doing a makeover on this family's home and on their lifestyle and helping teach the family how to support health in their chronically ill child. And this whole time, like I said, we're going to be tracking this by measuring things in blood. So you can measure markers of inflammation as they go down. You can measure cellular toxicity as it goes down. You can measure blood glucose and see how it changes over time as we make changes to their diet. We're going to be giving them all the kinds of bio-individual healing supports that they might need to help their child heal. Biodynamically grown organic foods, as unadulterated as we can find, which is hard in this world. We're also going to be addressing those arrested or stalled development things I talked about. So if there's a kid that didn't cross-crawl, we'll be getting them the therapies they need to revisit those developmental milestones. And the most exciting part is we're documenting it all on film. And our hope is to be able to make feature-length documentary or film series that we can share with the public. Because the point is, I want you to go to the theater or Netflix, download this film, and watch a story of a child get better. And I want this to be seen by people who aren't in this room or aren't seeing this right now and say, what? Autism is reversible? Wait, what? Rheumatoid arthritis is not forever? Like, I want their minds to be blown by that concept, because once you know that it's possible, then you want to know how you get it. And that's what we're hoping to do, is stimulate that thirst for knowledge and information that will help our kids get better and prevent other kids from getting sick. So now we could probably show that. There's a short video I'm just going to have you watch. I think you need the volume. Could you start it again with the volume? This isn't hooked up to the volume, is it? No.
The government says autism is showing up in children more than before.
1 in 50 school children has a form of autism.
Asthma rates rising dramatically over the past decade.
More than 1 in 7 children in the U.S. receiving a diagnosis of ADHD.
Numbers from the CDC have steadily increased in the past decade.
In the last 30 years, obesity rates for kids have tripled.
Frightening to parents to hear those dramatic numbers.
It may reduce the life expectancy of this generation of children and diminish their quality of life.
Our kids are sick. They're screaming out. They want help.
He still didn't have a single word. He was drooling. He was rubbing his head against the carpet. He was pushing himself into walls.
His eyes swelled shut. He was covered with hives from head to foot.
Probably around 14, 15 months, all that language disappeared.
From all that I can see, it looks like we've got a child here with pervasive developmental delay.
Noah, you keep holding your stomach. Does your side hurt?
Having a child with autism, it's not what you envision.
Unfortunately today, too many of our children, by analogy, function as canaries in the coal mine. They are teaching us that something is deeply out of order, deeply imbalanced, deeply in need of understanding, and largely lacking in therapy.
I think the first step to transforming this problem is to understand it. And we have not done a great job at that in healthcare.
We know that when our bodies are hit with toxins, it interferes with our biochemistry. They are not prepared for handling the 85,000 toxic chemicals on the market.
Whatever is lacking of essential nutrients that the body cannot make is going to control that whole system of cellular biology.
The brain is a physical organ of the body, and its health depends on the health of the cells. And when we address the body problems, the brain problems start to resolve.
What's wrong? Most of the pediatricians I went to see basically told me there was no chance for recovery.
Your son was just born with this, and it would be best for you and your husband to just accept your new normal.
I knew Ben was going to get better the day I got the diagnosis. He's not going to get better. No, I'm not really hearing that.
When you tell a person that there's no hope, that their child will always be this way, that there's nothing you can do about it, that's not science. That's a misuse of statistics.
The doctor said, no, your boy will have autism for a very long time, but my mother didn't give up. She kept on thinking of ways to try and get rid of autism.
There's an abundance of intriguing individual cases, or what we call anecdotes. They cry out to be better studied and documented.
So to think that just a few short years ago, he had to be in a room with an air purifier plugged in to his nebulizer. You know, flash forward to now, and he loves to hike and he loves to be outside. He couldn't do that a couple years ago.
People say kids can't recover. Well, they do recover. I've seen it. I've seen kids recover from autism, from ADHD, from Tourette's. I've seen it.
I feel like his true personality is coming through again. He has so many friends. He's got more best friends than I can count.
When he's doing BMX at the track and I'm sitting there watching him,
Come on, go, go!
I just know that there's no limits to what he can do.
If we do the science deeply, we will be able to document in ways that cannot be dismissed what many of us think we've been observing anecdotally, which is the improvements in these children.
This is one of the most important public health and scientific issues. We need to figure out how these people get better and reverse engineer it so we can do it for everyone.
Research has been largely fragmented across different communities and in different silos.
And I agree with our colleagues. There is no sufficiently documented comprehensive study that has thus far been executed. That's part of the fierce urgency for now.
We've been trained to believe that these illnesses are genetic and inborn and we need some kind of scientific miracle. That's not what we need right now. We need a fundamental rethinking on the optimization of our health and the minimization of threats to our health.
As we blaze this trail, others can learn as we have that it is possible to look at the individual, to remove obstacles to recovery, to evoke healing responses, and to do that in a way that is both very personal and rigorously scientific.
We're losing a generation of children. That's what's at stake.
If we project the current trends forward just half a century, everyone will be in a hospital bed taking care of the person next to them. We cannot continue on the current trajectory, and yet it shows no signs of abating.
Clearly there's something going on and there's something wrong when I can walk into a room of 20 kids and I know beyond a shadow of a doubt that there's at least one EpiPen in that room.
The economic cost is astronomical to our society, and the societal costs alone are tremendous.
Something is hurting our children. And pretty soon it's going to be 1 and 2. And then what? Then are we going to look at the issue?
The time is now for the scientific community to take recovery, environment, and nutrition seriously. Our future depends on it.
We need to start talking about our children's health.
The first day that I dropped him off and I picked him up and I put him in the car and I was like, did you have a great day at school? He's like, oh, I had a great day at school. And I was like, I am so proud of you, Connor. And from the back seat I hear, oh, I'm so proud of you too, Mom. I'm like, no, I'm proud of you. And no, I'm proud of you. I won, and I'm here. The reason why I'm doing this is I'm here to tell other parents, like, you can win too.
So I've seen that video 50,000 times. I edited it. I can't tell you how many. But that woman at the end, who's this mother of the boy that I was talking about who recovered from autism, she gets me every time because she has such strength and conviction. And that's one thing I want to say. When you meet a parent like that, you're like, you want to get down on your knees and be like, you are amazing, because they are amazing. But I want to say something else about parents. Just because you haven't recovered your child or because your child's sick doesn't mean you've done anything wrong. All you've done is live here and now. And Steve said something the other day that I think is really important. This was yesterday night, which was asking you to participate in solving this problem. Because we just live in this culture that is making us sick. But it's our time to change that. But we need all of you to participate. So when I mentioned before about taking the survey, this is citizen science. Participate, play a role so we can collect the data, so we can help convince people who poo-poo this, who say it's not real, that that's wrong, and that we can do better for our kids, and we can save future generations by changing the way we live on this planet. So We need to embrace this total load theory. We need to begin to make choices that are just in alignment with nature. Like, do you want to be that beautiful, surreal elephant on the savannah, or do you want to be the disgusting, decrepit, poor elephant inside in the wrong habitat? Like, this is a shift humanity needs to make. And I think our kids are helping us do that. Because if we can transform the way we think about our health, we totally have the capacity to save the planet. And we will save the polar bears, and we will stop deforestation just by taking care of our babies. And if we can't save the planet by loving the planet, surely we can save the planet by loving our children. So with that, I would like to ask you to please check out our websites, documentinghope.com, which is where we have all the information for this particular project. Again, this is a not-for-profit sponsored project. So it's being done by donations and sponsorships, private family foundations. We have raised enough money to take 5 children through the program, but we want to take 14, and we need your help. So if you know of any private family foundations or individuals that might be interested in helping support this initiative, please reach out to me, Beth at documentinghope.com, or Beth at epidemicanswers.org. Epidemic Answers is the 501c3 nonprofit organization that's sponsoring all of this work. It's also an amazing resource for parents. So if you have a child impacted by one of the new childhood epidemics, we have a provider directory where we have practitioners who know how to get to the root causes. We have monthly webinars that teach you how to make lifestyle changes, that talk about nutrition. We had Deborah Davis on for talking about EMFs. We talk about all different kinds of therapies. We have a health coach training program. So if you're a parent or a health coach who wants to learn more about how to heal the new childhood epidemics, we offer that online as well. So it's a tremendous resource. So with that, Steve, is there time for questions? Okay, does anyone have any questions? Yeah, right here. Right in the front, yeah. Yeah. Oh, microphone, sorry.
So we have a almost 2-year-old, and we've been actually going through this the past year, had an awakening, and it's been very emotional for us, and but we're so thankful we actually use your website and some of the practitioners. It's been great. But I don't know what to do with, I see my sister, she's having a baby in 3 weeks and doesn't believe anything I say. I have friends who I see some of their kids have like certain signs, and I want to shout to them and I want to say something, and I just know that they will look at me and now they won't be my friends anymore, or they'll think I'm trying to say I'm a better mom than you, or I love the idea of, yes, one family at a time. We're working on our daughter. I want to help other people, I feel, and I don't know how. Do you have any recommendations?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think it's something that people come across all the time. And one of the things is, and we were talking about this in the panel last night, is sometimes when you move into this space of trying to clean up your child's environment and trying to support their health in these ways that are sort of anathema to our culture. What do you mean you can't give your child McDonald's? Like, what are you, crazy? You know, you become this kind of fringe person with a tinfoil hat. Like, it's just is something that we have to go through. But the way to deal with that is to be proud of those changes. Don't for 1 second feel like I'm the outsider. You know in your heart that you are a leader and you are making the changes that everyone they're eventually gonna come to this. You are just like the first generation. You're the smart ones who wisened up before everyone else. So you have to be proud about those things. Never come from a place of judgment. Never judge other people's and their decisions, but people don't know what they don't know. But I think if you model what you know to be right and true, that people will begin to follow you. And the other thing I will say about that is find your people. It's like sitting in this room with tribe members. Like other people who get it, you get more confident in those decisions. So when you say to somebody like, oh, I wouldn't do that fluoride toothpaste, instead of looking crazy, you're gonna have somebody back here who's like, oh yeah, me neither, I would never do that. To safety in numbers, find your people, find your community, and you will feel more confident to just live the way you know is right and healthful and safe for your child. And soon other people will be like, oof, maybe I should be doing that. I see it happen all the time, but you gotta be confident. Be confident that you know you're doing the right thing. I don't know if that answered your question. In the back? question is, how long is this project going on? So we've been developing the scientific program for several years. We are about to launch the first of the second of the two studies. The second one's going to come a little bit later this year in terms of enrolling people into it. And then once we enroll, the first one's going to be ongoing. So we're going to be collecting surveys for as long as we can. We're trying to get 1,000 people to fill out the survey at a minimum of healthy people, people who have healthy children and sick children and everything in between. And then once we enroll those kids into the pilot program, there's an 18-month period of support. We anticipate that we're going to have to support some of the families with autism for a little bit longer because it's usually the most complex. But we're doing 18 months.
Participate with this? Will they be able to get some of the results back as to what I mean, are you going to be publishing those results as you go along?
Which results did you mean?
What your findings are how particular children developed into better health.
Yeah, so there's a couple pieces to this. So we will be publishing things. The hope is to, and the plan is to publish. We have a number of different scientific and medical advisors who would be spearheading that. But we will be publishing results when we're all done. But we'd also like to bring the information to the public sooner than that. That's why we want to do a media aspect, is because we want to be able to let the story unfold in real time and let people know about what's happening. With regard to the questionnaire, that is information that we're collecting data, and we're going to crunch the data and then be able to report on the findings as soon as we've made something meaningful out of the data. Yeah, right here.
Thank you so much for this presentation. It was very, very informative. I know you mentioned ages between 1 and 15 years old. Do you know of any documented cases in which there's been improvement for older kids?
So what I would say to that is depends on the condition, and it depends on the surroundings. So it is harder to have that same kind of impact the later you start. But having said that, there's all kinds of research that's coming out now that even conditions like Parkinson's and dementia and Alzheimer's, there is some reversibility to that due to neuroplasticity. So I know of one adult with autism who was able to significantly reduce his symptoms of autism with only traces left, but it is much harder the older you get, because if you think about patterns and habits that get hardwired in, you know, the neuroplasticity is there. I believe very much in neuroplasticity, but it's a lot easier and more malleable the younger you start. That's why it's so important to me that we get on children right now when there's a window of time that's really critical, and the earlier you start, the better outcomes you have. But I always, always, always believe in reversal of chronic conditions. Adults reverse their chronic conditions all the time. I have a good friend who reversed her MS, and I'm sure many of you know of Terry Walls, who was very publicly known to be a professor who reversed her MS. Autoimmune diseases, I know dozens of people that have reversed their autoimmune diseases as adults. I do think autism is a little bit more complicated, but I absolutely believe it can happen, and if it doesn't happen, you know, in terms of full recovery, which is kind of an amorphous term anyway, what does that really mean? Improved functionality, improved health, improved ability to tolerate the world, that can all happen, 100%. Yeah, over there.
You mentioned a website for the gut health from Jeff Leach. I didn't get to write that.
Yeah, so it's Jeff Leach, who's done the study on the microbiome, is American Gut Project. The Human Food Project is another thing he's affiliated with, but the American Gut Project.
I just want to say one thing. The American Food Project. Okay, I just got I just checked my Facebook, you know, because he's so used to it, listening to you. And a friend put up, and she was so proud. It showed the original Gerber baby, and now the new Gerber baby is going to be an autistic baby. And she thought that was a good thing. And here we are talking about how desensitized we are. And here, that's a prime example of how desensitized, that's now the new norm.
It's interesting. I mean, I think we need to embrace all of our kids and recognize that they are a part of our pediatric community. But I do think it is, you know, it is interesting how we do accept things to be normal that weren't normal just a few decades ago.
My brother-in-law's son is autistic, and when he was young, he ate McDonald's French fries and Kraft macaroni and cheese, and that's all he would eat. No matter what the mother, she tried to make, homemade macaroni and cheese, homemade potatoes, and that's all he would eat. So how do you take a child who's that, on the spectrum, and how do you get them to start eating healthy, or even attempt to start eating healthy?
Right, it's a big problem. It's really complex, because if you think about it, sometimes it's not your child that's actually choosing the food. It is their microbiome that's choosing the food. And you'll know this if you've ever taken a couple of rounds of antibiotics, then you grow a little yeast in your gut, and then all of a sudden you're fiending for sugar. I don't know if anyone's ever had that experience, but there's all kinds of research showing that the microbiome, what is in the microbes in your gut actually makes us choose and select certain foods over others. In some cases, children will self-select because there is actually a biochemical reaction in their body that produces like an endorphin response. So a lot of times kids who are on the autism spectrum have kind of almost an addiction to dairy and wheat, because it produces this it stimulates a response in them that almost triggers a place in the reward center of the brain. So it's not their fault, and even the parents try so hard to try and get them to change diet, and what I would say is there are professionals out there who do this for their job, feeding therapists and nutritionists who work specifically with kids on the spectrum to help expand their palate. Sometimes it's a nutrient deficiency, like a zinc deficiency, that can actually contribute to limited eating. So I would say that it's a problem that you keep working at. And there are a lot of professionals out there who are amazing at it and know the tricks and ways to get through that. And I think the time is up, so thank you very much.